I have an officer over at 23 Helter Lane.
23 what?
Helter Lane.
Felter?
Yes.
Okay, what's going on, man?
I was in the shower. I heard gunshots. And I took my wife's shower.
It's a story that defies belief. A man who convinced everyone, his friends, his neighbors, even federal investigators, that he was nothing more than a devoted husband and father. He played his role so well that no one suspected the darkness hiding beneath the surface. But the truth always finds a way out. When the 911 call came in on April 7, 2018, it sounded like the voice of a man in sheer panic. His words tumbled out in a frantic rush. His wife had been shot, there was blood everywhere, and he had no idea what had happened. He had been in the shower, he said, when the deafening blast of a gunshot shattered the silence. By the time he rushed out, it was too late. His wife was on the floor, unresponsive.
So you got in the shower? How long were you in the shower, what you said?
Maybe 5 minutes.
5 minutes, all right.
And I heard boom, boom, but I thought it was a balloon.
How many shots did you hear?
2.
You heard 2?
And I thought it was a balloon at first. Then I heard the secondary shot. And I ran out there and seen her laying.
To the officers who arrived on the scene, the situation seemed tragic but straightforward. A young mother dead in her own home, her husband the devastated witness to it all. Their 6-year-old son was still in the house, caught in the middle of a nightmare no child should ever have to endure. Everything about that morning felt like the tragic end to an already troubled life. Until investigators started asking questions. At first, the husband's story appeared plausible. His voice on the emergency call was thick with emotion, cracking under the weight of his apparent grief. But there was something that didn't sit right. A single gunshot wound to the chest, an unusual injury for a self-inflicted act. The crime scene itself raised questions. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, no immediately obvious reason for why this young woman would have wanted to end her life. And then there was the husband. In the following days, whispers began to surface. Whispers that suggested this was no tragic accident, no act of desperation. This was something far more insidious. There were inconsistencies in his statements, gaps in his timeline, things he said that didn't quite add up. But the most damning evidence wasn't found in what he told the police. It was found in his own home. This case wasn't just another senseless act of violence. It was the story of deception, of a man who managed to fool those closest to him, manipulating perceptions and controlling the narrative at every turn. Even law enforcement, trained to spot lies, struggled to unravel the truth. He was confident, calculated, and chillingly composed in the face of scrutiny. It wasn't until investigators dug deeper, peeling back the layers of the life he had so carefully constructed, that they realized who they were really dealing with.
Yeah.
It's not wet.
No.
So he was in the shower.
Yeah.
Okay.
How had he managed to deceive so many? What secrets did he bury beneath the image of a devoted husband? And what really happened behind the closed doors of that quiet home on Felter Lane? The answers to these questions would reveal a horrifying truth, one that would shake an entire community and leave a haunting legacy in its wake. This is the terrifying case of Keith Johansen. To those who knew them, Brandi Selenza and Keith Johansen seemed like an ordinary couple navigating the complexities of life together. Brandi, at 25, was a vibrant young mother celebrated for her infectious smile and unwavering dedication to her 6-year-old son. Keith, nearly a decade her senior, appeared as a devoted partner and stepfather. Their social media profiles painted a picture of familial bliss, weekend outings, shared laughter, and the milestones of their young child. Yet, as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a tumultuous reality. Keith's past was marred by a 2008 arrest for driving without a valid license and a protection order from a previous relationship. These incidents hinted at a pattern of behavior that would later come into sharper focus. Friends and family, however, remained largely unaware of these red flags, seeing only the facade the couple presented to the world. Brandy's life before Keith had been filled with promise. She was known for her kindness, her commitment to her son, and her dreams of building a better future. Meeting Keith seemed like a step toward that future, a partner to share her hopes and challenges. But as their relationship progressed, subtle changes began to surface. Keith's demeanor, initially charming and attentive, grew increasingly controlling. He isolated Brandy from her friends and family, dictating her interactions and monitoring her movements. What outsiders perceived as protectiveness was, in reality, a tightening grip on Brandy's autonomy. Financial control became another tool of manipulation. Keith managed the household finances, limiting Brandy's access to money and scrutinizing her spending. This economic dependency further entrenched her in a cycle of control, making it difficult to envision a life beyond the confines of their relationship. The couple's new home on Felter Lane in Palm Coast, Florida, symbolized a fresh start, a place to build new memories. Yet within its walls, the dynamics of power and control played out with increasing intensity. Neighbors occasionally heard raised voices but dismissed them as typical marital disputes, unaware of the escalating tension behind closed doors. Brandy's close bond with her son remained a constant source of joy and strength. Photographs captured moments of genuine happiness between mother and child, a testament to her enduring love and resilience. These images stand in stark contrast to the turmoil that characterized her relationship with Keith. As time passed, Keith's behavior grew more erratic. He exhibited signs of paranoia, accusing Brandy of infidelity without cause. These unfounded allegations served to justify his increasing surveillance and control over her daily life. The home security system, ostensibly installed for protection, became a means to monitor and intimidate. Despite these challenges, Brandy maintained her outward composure. She confided little in friends and family, perhaps out of fear, shame, or hope that things would improve. This silence is a common thread in abusive relationships, where victims often feel trapped by a complex web of emotional and practical considerations. The turning point came in the early months of 2018. Incidents of verbal abuse escalated, with Keith's threats becoming more explicit and alarming. The once hidden cracks in their relationship began to widen, hinting at the potential for a tragic outcome.
Just use it. Gave you too many darn chances, man. Too many. Show a cop these videos. I'd rather be in prison. I could call one of my homies and make sure you both die. Shoot me out my movie.
Why?
Sure. I gave up everything on a chance. Somebody lied. Cheats. Does this and that. You know what? I'm gonna leave it here to haunt you. Maybe one day you will.
On the morning of April 7, 2018, the facade shattered irreparably. The events of that day would not only reveal the depth of the dysfunction within the Johansson household, but also set in motion a chain of investigations and revelations that would captivate and horrify all who learned of them. The morning of April 7, 2018, began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of Palm Coast, Florida. But in a modest home on Felter Lane, something horrific was about to unfold. Something that would shatter the illusion of normalcy that Keith Johansson had so carefully crafted. At 10:37 a.m., a chilling call came through to the Flagler County 911 dispatch center. On the other end of the line was Keith Johansson. His voice trembled, laced with what sounded like panic. "I was in the shower and I heard a gunshot. I came out and she's on the floor. There's blood everywhere." The dispatcher pressed for details. Was she breathing? Could he see a weapon? Keith's responses were scattered, disjointed. He claimed he didn't know what happened, only that his wife, Brandy Celenza, was lying there, unresponsive. He kept repeating himself, almost as if he were trying to convince himself of the story he was giving. Paramedics and officers were dispatched immediately. As they raced toward Felter Lane, sirens piercing through the otherwise calm morning, Keith stayed on the phone. He wasn't crying. He wasn't pleading for his wife to wake up. His tone was strangely controlled, shocked, but not distraught. Within minutes, the first responders arrived. The moment they stepped through the front door, the air inside felt thick with something unseen, something oppressive. The house was still, eerily quiet, except for the low hum of a children's television show playing in another room. They found Brandy in the master bedroom. She was on her back, motionless, her long brown hair fanned out across the floor. Blood pooled beneath her, seeping into the carpet, spreading in slow, ominous tendrils. Her chest bore 2 gunshot wounds, one directly over her heart. The position of her body was unnatural. Her arms lay stiff at her sides, as if placed there rather than having fallen naturally. Keith stood nearby, watching. His face was unreadable. He pointed toward a gun resting a few feet away from Brandy's body, claiming she must have shot herself while he was in the shower. A veteran paramedic moved quickly, kneeling beside Brandy, checking for any sign of life, but it was too late. She was already gone. One of the responders, a sheriff's deputy, turned to Keith. "You said she shot herself?" Keith nodded quickly. "Yeah, I think so. I was in the shower. I didn't see it." It didn't take long for the emergency responders to sense that something was off. The position of the gun, the lack of lividity in Brandy's hands, the absence of gunpowder residue on her skin, all of it raised silent alarms. One officer walked through the house, making his way to the child's room. Inside, Brandy and Keith's 6-year-old son sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes fixed on the television. He hadn't moved. Had he heard anything? Had he seen anything? The officer crouched down beside him, lowering his voice. "Hey, buddy, did you hear a loud noise?" The boy blinked. He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, Mummy and Daddy were fighting again." The officer's blood ran cold. He glanced back toward the master bedroom, where Keith was now standing near the doorway, arms crossed, his jaw set. Keith wasn't reacting the way a man should after losing his wife in such a sudden, violent way. He wasn't begging the paramedics to keep trying. He wasn't breaking down, overwhelmed by grief. Instead, he seemed more concerned with what would happen next.
What usually happens?
I don't even know. These aren't usual occurrences, so I'm sure they don't want to be standing out in the rain and in the sun. It looks like it's about to downpour.
No, do you have heresies that help you?
Oh, I'm sure they have a whole list of... They get paid a lot more than I get paid to know how to handle these situations.
Because I don't know if I'm going to be all right.
One of the responding officers discreetly stepped outside and radioed for detectives to come to the scene. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. As more officers arrived, the first step was securing the house. Keith was asked to sit in the living room while investigators began their preliminary assessment. The crime scene tape went up. Neighbors started peeking through blinds, and whispers of tragedy spread down the quiet suburban street. Brandy's body was carefully examined. The trajectory of the bullets, the entry wounds, the lack of any defensive injuries, none of it aligned with suicide. And the fact that there were 2 gunshot wounds made the story even more suspicious. Officers turned their attention to Keith again. "You said she was suicidal?" one detective asked. Keith hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. She was upset earlier." "About what?" "Just stuff. Life." His words were vague, calculated. He wasn't giving them anything concrete. Detectives exchanged glances. They had been at crime scenes like this before. This wasn't what a man sounded like when he had just lost the love of his life. This was what a man sounded like when he was trying to control a narrative. As the investigation began in earnest, one thing became clear. Brandy Salenza had not taken her own life. And Keith Johansson was not telling the truth. As officers secured the crime scene that morning, something about Keith Johansson's demeanor gnawed at them. He was too composed, too calculated. He wasn't the frantic, grief-stricken husband they expected to see. Instead, his concern seemed to lie elsewhere. On the questions detectives were asking and how his answers might shape their conclusions, The first step in the investigation was a thorough examination of the scene. The gun, a .45 caliber Glock, lay a few feet from Brandy's body. Its position immediately raised red flags. If Brandy had truly shot herself, how had the gun landed so far away? Firearms used in self-inflicted gunshot wounds typically fall beside or near the victim's hand, but Brandy's was placed at an odd angle, almost as if it had been staged. Then there was the blood spatter, or lack thereof. Experts on the scene noted that the pattern of blood did not align with Keith's version of events. Had she shot herself, there would have been evidence of high-velocity blood spatter on her hands, the gun, and even nearby surfaces, but nothing supported that theory. And then there was the most damning piece of evidence. Brandy had been shot twice. A single gunshot wound might have left some room for speculation, but two? That alone all but ruled out the possibility of suicide. A self-inflicted gunshot to the chest is almost always immediately incapacitating. The idea that Brandy could have mustered the strength to fire a second shot was not just unlikely, it was impossible. As detectives began combing through the evidence, Keith was taken to the Flagler County Sheriff's Office for questioning. His story remained the same. He had been in the shower when he heard the shot. He claimed he rushed out, found Brandy on the floor, and called 911. He insisted he had no idea why she would harm herself, offering vague suggestions about her being stressed or not herself lately. But when asked for specific incidents of suicidal behavior, Keith struggled to provide any real examples. Meanwhile, investigators turned their attention to Brandy herself. Who was she? What was her life like before this tragedy? They spoke to family, friends, and neighbors, piecing together a very different picture from the one Keith had tried to paint. Brandy was not suicidal. She was a devoted mother, a kind-hearted woman who adored her son. According to those who knew her, she was strong, resilient, and had been making plans for the future. She had dreams that did not include Keith. As detectives dug deeper, a disturbing truth began to emerge. Brandy had been trapped in a toxic, abusive marriage. Keith was controlling, possessive, and prone to rage. He monitored her every move, dictated who she could speak to, and lashed out at the slightest perceived slight. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Brandy had been trying to escape, and Keith knew it. Friends revealed that Brandy had confided in them about leaving Keith. She was scared, but she was ready to take the first steps toward freedom. In fact, just weeks before her death, she had secretly started making arrangements to move out. But Keith was not the kind of man who let go easily. Detectives then turned to one of the most crucial pieces of evidence in the case: the security footage from inside the Johansson home. The house had a sophisticated security system, complete with cameras in multiple rooms. If Keith had been in the shower as he claimed, there was a strong chance the cameras could prove or disprove his story. The footage was damning. In the days leading up to Brandy's death, the recordings captured a pattern of psychological and emotional abuse. Keith could be seen berating Brandy, insulting her, and in some instances, physically intimidating her. One chilling clip showed him standing over her as she sat on the couch, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you can just do whatever you want? You're nothing without me." Then there was the footage from that morning. At 10:24 a.m., just minutes before the 911 call, Brandy was seen in the kitchen pouring a cup of coffee. She looked calm, unaware of what was about to happen. Then Keith entered the frame. They spoke briefly. There was no indication of an argument, no visible distress. And then the camera cut out. Investigators noted that the footage from the bedroom where Brandy was found was missing. Someone had tampered with the system, and the only person with access to the security controls was Keith. This was no suicide, this was premeditated murder. With the weight of the evidence mounting against him, detectives made their move. On April 9, just 2 days after Brandy's death, Keith Johansson was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. As he was led away in handcuffs, his demeanor shifted. The feigned grief, the worried husband act, it was gone. Instead, he wore a look of cold resignation, as if he had known this moment was coming all along. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbors who had once seen Keith and Brandy as an average couple now struggled to reconcile the truth. But for Brandy's loved ones, there was no doubt. They had lost her to a man who had spent years controlling her, and when he realized he was losing his grip, he had taken the most permanent step possible. The case against Keith was solid, but it was far from over. The road to justice would be long and grueling, filled with twists, courtroom battles, and an unwavering fight to ensure Brandy's voice was heard, even in death. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension as Keith Johansen took the stand in his own defense. It was October 2021, over 3 years since the tragic death of his wife, Brandy Salenza. The trial had garnered significant attention, not just for the heinous nature of the crime, but for the audacity of the accused to testify on his own behalf. As he settled into the witness chair, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the chance to hear Johansen's account, to see if his words could somehow explain the inexplicable. Under the harsh glare of the courtroom lights, Johansen appeared composed, almost detached. His demeanor was unsettling to many in attendance, especially considering the gravity of the charges against him. He began his testimony by recounting the events of that fateful morning, but this time his story had changed dramatically. Gone were the previous claims of an accidental shooting or a tragic suicide. Now, Johansen asserted that he had acted in self-defense. He painted a picture of Brandy as a volatile individual, suggesting that she had attacked him in a drug-fueled rage, leaving him no choice but to protect himself. The prosecution was quick to challenge this narrative. Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Dunton approached the podium, her expression steely and determined. "Mr. Johansen," she began, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom, "you've provided multiple accounts of what transpired on April 7, 2018. Can you explain why your initial statements to law enforcement differ so drastically from your testimony today?" Johansen shifted in his seat, his composure faltering for the first time. "I was trying to protect Brandy's reputation," he replied. "I didn't want anyone to know about her drug use." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. Dunton seized the moment. "So, you're asking this court to believe that you lied to protect a woman you now claim attacked you, a woman you felt so threatened by that you had to shoot her twice." Johansen's silence spoke volumes. The prosecution proceeded to dismantle his self-defense claim methodically. They presented the jury with security footage from the couple's home, recordings that Johansen himself had installed. These videos painted a starkly different picture from the one he attempted to portray. In one clip, dated just days before the shooting, Johansen is seen towering over Brandy, his voice dripping with venom as he berates her. "You're nothing without me," he sneered, his face contorted with rage. Another video showed him brandishing a firearm, taunting her to end it all if she was so unhappy. The jury watched in stunned silence, the images searing into their minds. The evidence of Johansen's abusive behavior was overwhelming. Friends and family testified about Brandy's fear, her plans to leave him, and his obsessive need to control every aspect of her life. The prosecution argued that his actions were those of a man who felt his control slipping away and chose to eliminate the source of his perceived problem. As the trial progressed, Johansen's defense unraveled further. His lack of remorse, his shifting narratives, and the damning evidence from the security footage painted a clear picture for the jury. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, they returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. Circuit Judge Christopher France sentenced Johansen to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his days behind bars.
Keith John Johansen, case number 2018-426 CFFA, Judge Christopher France. Verdict: Count 1 of the indictment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Keith John Johansen, as follows to count 1 of the indictment. Guilty as charged as the crime of first-degree murder.
The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and sorrow. Brandy's family and friends clung to one another, tears streaming down their faces. Justice had been served, but it could never bring back the vibrant young woman they had lost. As Johansson was led away in handcuffs, his expression remained stoic. The man who had once manipulated and controlled those around him now faced a future devoid of freedom, a fitting end for someone who had shown such callous disregard for human life. The trial of Keith Johansson served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse and the importance of seeking help before it's too late. Brandy's story, though tragic, became a catalyst for change, inspiring others to speak out and seek safety from similar situations. Brandy Shalenz's story did not end in that courtroom. While her loved ones mourned, the echoes of her tragic death rippled far beyond the walls of the Johansson home. In the wake of her murder, awareness of domestic violence grew, and conversations that had long been whispered behind closed doors were now being spoken aloud. Brandy's case became a haunting example of how even those who seem strong, those who smile through their struggles, can be trapped in the cycle of abuse. Her family, devastated but determined, vowed that her death would not be in vain. They worked to keep her memory alive, sharing her story to help others recognize the signs of coercion and control before it was too late. Advocates for domestic violence victims took her case as a rallying cry, pushing for stronger protections and more accessible resources for those in dangerous relationships. At Brandy's memorial service, friends and family gathered, not just to grieve, but to celebrate the life she lived. Photos of her and her son, moments of laughter and love, frozen in time, were displayed alongside candles that flickered in the cool evening air. People shared stories of her kindness, her resilience, her love for her son, a boy now forced to grow up without his mother. Keith Johansson may have taken Brandy's life, but he could not silence her voice. It lived on in every person who heard her story and decided to take action. It lived on in the women who saw themselves in her and finally had the courage to leave. It lived on in the conversations that shifted from, "Why didn't she just leave?" to, "How can we help?" While nothing could bring Brandy back, her legacy became a beacon of hope, a reminder that justice, though delayed, could be served. Her death was not just a statistic in the long and tragic history of domestic violence. It was a call to action, a demand that no more lives be lost in silence. If you believe victims of domestic violence deserve a voice, subscribe to the channel. Only those who think abuse should continue unchecked will ignore this message.